Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Radio Talk Network. Ann Arbor, Michigan is the broadcast home of PWR Talk, InternetVoicesRadio.com. And now from 5:15 to 6 o'clock, let me present to you Lillian's interviews. And today her special guest is Richard Martini, who wrote a book called Flip Side, A Tourist Guide to the Afterlife. Good afternoon, Richard. How are you?
Hi, Lillian. I'm fantastic. How's everything in Ann Arbor today?
It's going to rain for the next week.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that, but, you know, what are you going to do?
It brings out the fall colors. One should be happy for that.
That's true. Here we are on the first day of fall of 2011. We love that.
Yeah, and in a couple more months, we'll be heading into the great 2012, or the big unknown.
Or the last year on the planet, as some people seem to agree.
Well,
not me.
I don't. I know from the archaeologist that is on the station that tells me that they got the wrong numbers and we have another 2,000 years to go. So
I did hear that. I heard that the guy who originally translated the Mayan calendar back in the 1920s was just off a little bit.
Yeah. Hey,
so
everybody has times like that. You wrote a guide to help people maneuver and get through the afterlife. What got you there in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you, very unusually, I had a very dear friend who was dying. She had cancer, and it was in 1996. And as I would sit there on a Sunday afternoon and read the newspaper to her, one day she said, "I think I'm going to another galaxy." And I said, "What makes you say that?" She said, "Well, I have this recurring dream that I'm in a classroom in another galaxy. Everyone is dressed in white, and it's a class in spirituality." And she's they're speaking a language I've never heard before, but I completely understand. And I thought to myself, well, that must be the morphine drip. I wasn't quite sure how to deal with that. But the day she died, I got a call from her close friend who said, "I had the most amazing dream about Luana." That was her name. I had this dream about Luana, and she was in the fourth dimension, she said, in a classroom dressed in white. Everyone in the class was dressed in white, and it was a class in spirituality, and she seemed very happy. Well, I thought that was a bit odd. I mentioned it to the nurse who was taking care of her, and she nearly fainted and said that was the recurring dream she had. So some years later, and it's detailed in the book, but some years later, through the death of another friend, actually, I came to the work of Michael Newton. Now, I'm a filmmaker. I've written and directed a number of feature films, and I've written freelance articles, but I came across this work of Michael Newton, who said that over 30 years, 7,000 people under deep hypnosis said the same thing about the afterlife. Well, I thought that was interesting. I picked up his book, Journey of Souls, and the first chapter, one of his clients is describing a classroom in the afterlife. Everyone's dressed in white, and they're all dealing with this subject of healing energy. And I thought, wait a second. So I, at that moment, thought, well, this might be an interesting area for a documentary. And I contacted the Newton organization. They told me Michael was retired, but that he was going to be at a conference in Chicago, my hometown. So I flew to Chicago, and I was pretty startled when they said, "You know what, you can film anything. Michael's agreed to speak to you. It's going to be his last interview." So I filmed Michael talking about this research. As a skeptic and as a journalist, I was trying to really see, like, is there any hole in what he's talking about? And that was, it was really, really unusual story that he told me. But I also interviewed his wife, Peggy, because he said a number of things, like, during the course of his research, his 30 years as a hypnotherapist, he didn't tell anybody about his work. He wouldn't even go into a bookstore for fear that some title might influence his questions. And she told me that was true. I said, "Well, what did you think about your husband?" And she said, "When he came home and told me these stories, I thought they were going to cart him off." And she said, "Until I heard the tapes." And once she heard the tapes of what was happening in his office, people under deep hypnosis, like a 6-hour session, were saying the same things about what happens when we die. So in my mind, I thought, well, I want to get some tapes, because if it's true for him, it would be true for anybody doing this research. So I, at that moment, thought, well, this might be an interesting area for a documentary. And I contacted the Newton organization. They told me Michael was retired, but that he was going to be at a conference in Chicago, my hometown. So I flew to Chicago, and I was pretty startled when they said, "You know what, you can film anything. Michael's agreed to speak to you. It's going to be his last interview." So I tracked down some Newton-trained hypnotherapists around the world and went to their offices and interviewed them and then filmed them doing these sessions. And I can tell you the knock on hypnosis, it always has been, is that, the hypnotherapist somehow is going to lead his patient down the path. And I've found this not to be the case because I can see the technique. They ask a series of questions and people answer them, or they can say, I don't see anything. Or anyway, and at the end of this conference that I was filming, they asked me if I wanted to do a session. And in a George Plimpton-like moment, I realized, he's the guy who wrote that story about being a Detroit tiger, paper tiger.
Yes, I saw the movie.
Yes, terrific journalist. And, in that moment, I thought, well, I have to try this. So I went and did a session, a 4-hour session, where not only did I see a past life, but honestly, as I went into the session, I thought, I'm not going to be forced into saying anything. And if I don't see anything, I'm going to say that. I'll just keep repeating it. I don't see anything. It's fine for me to say that. And this hypnotherapist, who was Jimmy Quast, he's Newton trained and he's very good. And at some point he said, so where are we? What do you see? And I said, I don't see anything. It's dark. And very cleverly he said, well, just look down. And as I did that in my mind's eye, I started to see a person and a place and a time and a period and dramatic events. And then I had, like all the other patients, the same experience of going into, and this is what makes his work different from Brian Weiss or anybody else who does past life regression. He found that in this session you can go into the life between lives. It's where we all go after our life, where we all have the same experience of meeting our soul group. There's usually about 15 people in the person's soul group. There's a main spirit guide. You could call it a guardian angel, but somebody who's agreed to look over all of your lifetimes. You see that person and you're profoundly moved seeing that person. And people then there's other events that happen, not always in the same order. You might go to a past life pavilion, a little bit like Albert Brooks's movie, Defending Your Life, where Shirley MacLaine was overseeing the past lives. Well, this is what people say. There is some kind of a place where you can go and see, and this is what's so important about this research. Why did you choose that past life? Why did you choose this life? And how do the two intersect? In other words, what they're saying is we choose our parents. We choose our life knowing that the difficulties we're going to go through is going to help us spiritually progress as souls.
Now, that's very interesting because for me personally, I've known who my guardian angel has been all my life. In fact, I gave him the name of Father Thomas.
That's great.
Because I'm a great doubter. And unless I can really see it for myself, I brush it aside and say, it doesn't exist. Right. Now, has some of the other people who were put under hypnosis, have they ever mentioned that they have met their guardian angel before they died? And
oh, absolutely.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better because when I try to explain this to people, I say, Father Thomas is my conscience. And if he says no, I pay attention. Otherwise, the consequences
did you know of Father
are
Thomas?
No.
Did you know of Father Thomas in this life, or you just gave him that?
I gave him that name because of Thomas with the apostles who already
the doubter.
Yes.
The great doubter, yes, of course.
And to me, that fit me to a T. Unless you could prove it in some capacity that my little old brain could actually make sense of, I wasn't going to believe you.
Right.
And because of that, I've come a long way, baby. So it's nice to know that there are other people out there who are not lunatics, because I was dubbed the lunatic in my family when I said, right. I met a guardian angel, and this is what he said. And they kind of put Father Thomas right up there with an imaginary playmate, although my imaginary playmate would actually get me if I made a wrong choice, saying, nope, you can't do that. I won't let you do that. You're not supposed to do that. You know you're not supposed to do it. and I'm going to
Right.
make sure you toe the line. So I find that very interesting.
Well, people do have, when they go through a session and they meet their spirit guide or guardian angel for the first time, they recognize this person as somebody who's been advising them, let's say, for their lifetime. Now, sometimes when people begin their session, as they're sort of in this, let's say, room, sometimes it feels like a room of people, sometimes it feels like an auditorium, sometimes it's a huge plane, and out of the plane comes this crowd of people, and then out of the center of that comes your spirit guide. Sometimes they'll say, oh my goodness, it's Jesus, or they'll see it's Buddha, or it's Muhammad. They'll see their spiritual person that they've always thought about coming towards them. But as they examine that person, then they start to see, oh, no, this is my spirit guide. So sometimes when people have a fantasy, let's say, or a near-death experience where they feel like they went and saw Jesus or something like that, and they come back and talk about it, if you can examine it, let's say, under this kind of hypnotherapy, you'll see that it's your spirit guide who may have been with you in a lifetime as a father or a brother or a sister or a son, because you asked them to come along with you in that journey. And in this case, your Father Thomas is somebody who's been, and let's just give him that name, has been advising you and keeping you on the straight and narrow and encouraging you to do things with your life that help and heal other people, like doing an internet radio show so you can pass this information around to the planet.
Yes. Yes. So, since I've been doing this internet radio station, he's been very, very quiet. He picks on me for other things, but for this particular thing, it's like, do it and keep doing it because you have found your purpose. This is why you came.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I must say, I have friends, very close friends, who not only are doubters of what I'm talking about or what Michael Newton talked about, but they literally run from the room when I bring the subject up. But what I usually tell people is, you can examine this kind of thing in your own life, especially with children. In my case, I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. When my son was 2 years old, the first conversation that I had with him, I was in Chicago visiting my mom. And up until that point, we'd only said words to each other. I love you, et cetera, et cetera. And he was 2, and he said, Dad, I was a monk in Nepal. Now, I was startled. I said, put your mother on the phone. I said, what the heck? What's going on over there? She said, I don't know why he said that. I have no idea. So we're kind of an open family with that. We don't say, no, you didn't. We just say, okay, well, that's interesting. So about a year later, I'm in the car with him, and I said, his name is RJ. And I said, so RJ, did you know Daddy from before? He said, yeah. I said, where did you meet Daddy? He said, Tibet. I said, where in Tibet? He said, on the path. Now, I have never used the word path in his lifetime because I live in Santa Monica. We got streets here. But then I remembered years before, not that long ago, but 3 years before, I was on Mount Kailash, which is in western Tibet. It's a sacred mountain in the Buddhist and Hindu pantheon. I was there with Robert Thurman, former Tibetan monk who was leading a tour around Kailash. He's Uma Thurman's father. And at some point he stopped and said, and I was filming this documentary, and he stopped and said, this is the most sacred spot on the planet. If you make a wish here, it will come true. And I thought, I literally was thinking, okay, $1 million or a 3-picture deal. My Hollywood mentality.
It doesn't work that way.
But, you're thinking if it's a wish, why not? It'll help,
Right.
So I couldn't make up my mind. And I went back and forth between those two ridiculous concepts. And I said, whatever pops out of my mouth, that's my wish. And out of my mouth came, I want a son. And when I said it, I literally looked around. Where did that come from? I had a daughter, but it wasn't in my conscious mind. And I thought, oh, maybe it must be in my DNA or something. Why would I say that? But now I'm back in the car with him in Santa Monica, and I say, do you mean Mount Kailash? Do you mean we met on Mount Kailash? He goes, no. Oh. So I said, oh, wow, path in Tibet. Wait a minute, was it Kangra? He looks at me, he says, yes, it was Kangra. Kangra is the name of that path that goes around Mount Kailash in Tibetan. He was being specific, but I said the word to him, and he agreed with me. So now, a year later, I was working on the movie Salt. Philip Noyce, the film director, is a dear friend, and he invited me to come and work on that picture as his assistant, this Angelina Jolie film. And at some point, I had sublet an apartment in the West Village, and my wife and kids were visiting. I was on the set, and RJ went to the library of the person whose house it was, pulled 2 books out of the library, looked at one, threw it in the trash. My wife said, "What are you doing?" He said, "That book is worthless. This is the important one." And it was Robert Thurman's book, Circling the Sacred Mountain, about his trip around Kailash. RJ flipped it open to the picture of where I made that wish, pointed to it, and said, "That's where I found Daddy."
Pretty profound.
So my wife called me and said, Did you show him? No. I had never said the word Kailash to him other than that time in the car. Never showed a picture of Kailash to him. So now when he sees a picture of Kailash, he'll say, he's 6 now. So I go, "Oh, look, it's the Wish Mountain." Kids say the darndest things, but
yes.
If you pay attention to them, and Carol Bowman wrote a wonderful book, Children's Past Lives, you pay attention to what they're saying, I think you'll find, look, there's a lot of Scooby-Doo in what they say, but I'll give you one other quick story. When I was working on Salt, a New York police officer who was one of our advisors had heard me talking about this because I was shooting my documentary simultaneously. And he said, "Can I talk to you?" And he pulled me into a back room. He said, "I got this problem. My 8-year-old daughter, she says she sees a ghost in my kitchen, and it freaks me out. And then she says, 'Daddy, I was born in Australia.' So now she's talking about some life she had in Australia." He said, "Are these two connected?" And I said, "Well, listen, first of all, you're talking to a Guido working on a movie set, but from my experience, yeah, they are connected, because when we're outside of ourselves, we are, we do hang around if we want to." And then he described how he had asked his daughter to describe this person hanging around the kitchen, and he pulled out a picture of his partner who had died some years before. She said, "Yeah, that's him, Daddy, but he's younger and more handsome now." So his partner, who may be perhaps part of his soul group, I don't know, was hanging around his apartment, keeping an eye on him and her. So then he said, "What do I do about the Australia thing?" I said, "Well, generally when kids are making up stories, the details go all over the place. But if they're remembering something, the details pretty much stay the same. So why don't you get a map of Australia, take it out and show it to her and ask her." And so he did. And the next day he came into the set. He was so excited. He had pulled this map out. She was thrilled to point to Perth and say, "I was a man. I had a family. We died in a drought. There wasn't enough food for us." And she burst into tears. But she was able to tell him that story. And by telling it, she was able to get it off her chest. And, then once you get it off your chest, now you can move on with your life. And your dad listened to you. He didn't say, no, this didn't happen. You weren't born in Australia. You're born in Brooklyn. But, I think the world is changing enough for consciousness that we can talk about these things now, because they're happening either more frequently, maybe because of the internet, maybe because we're open, maybe because we're listening, but it can only bode well for the planet.
I think that instead of making a mandatory health care plan, I think that people who have pain from chronic problems or diseases should go to a hypnotherapist and find out what happened before they arrived here.
Well, can I tell you that I was just having this conversation an hour ago with a dear friend who has just been diagnosed with cancer, and we were having this conversation. I was, trying to sort of say to him, look, there's a lot of tools in this toolkit that you're going to need when you go into this battle. You need many tools. You're going to need your doctor. You're going to need chemotherapy. You're going to need all these things, but you need a spiritual tool as well. You need to go within. You need to meditate. You need to do, these are all tools. And one other tool in the kit can be hypnotherapy. I'll tell you that in my own work, I filmed a person under hypnosis. Unbeknownst to me, he was near kidney failure. He had a kidney problem. I wasn't aware of it. I knew that he was always in pain whenever he sat down. I didn't realize it was so serious. But in his session that I filmed, and it's in the book, he remembered, whether it's true or not, we don't know, but he remembered, it felt true, being stabbed in the back by his father for stealing money from him in a previous life. The hypnotherapist said, let's examine that. Let's go through this. Why did you take the money? So he went through this kind of catharsis of examining what happened. When he came out of the session, he said to me, Richard, I haven't been able to sit still in my whole life. This is the first time I've ever been able to. And I said, why? He said, well, I've had this problem. 2 weeks later, I just, by coincidence, and maybe there is no coincidence, I was sitting with his doctor. We started talking. He said, did he tell you about his panel work coming back today? I said, what are you talking about? He said, he was in renal failure when he came to me, and I don't know what happened in your session, but his panel just came back normal. So his kidney problem was solved. You could argue psychosomatically, but you can also argue, why not? What a wonderful way to dig into stuff that we don't know anything about how the body can heal itself. And this is the only way that I'm aware of, because it's a 6-hour session as opposed to normal hypnotherapy is an hour or 2 hours. Michael Newton or the Newton Organization, NewtonInstitute.org, they have a list of all their trained people around the country. And this isn't what they normally do, but I would encourage people who want to see a hypnotherapist, go in with this problem and say, I have this health issue and I really want to examine it. Now, there's no guarantee that your subconscious is going to let you examine it because, who knows? You may have signed up for a lifetime where you go through this to help someone else on some level, to help yourself learn something on some level. You don't know, but you may be able to get a hold of that, and you may be able to find a way to help mediate what you're going through.
Now, that's a very interesting point that you bring up, and I think that people need to be aware of that. For when you decide to come back or you're asked to come back, there are some things that you may need to learn, as they used to say, to make you a better person or to make you a stronger person. I've been hearing that all my life. Oh, you need to do this because this will make you a stronger person. And you turn around and say, but I'm already strong. I don't need any more strength in that particular area. And the person says, no, you still need a little more.
Well, I'll tell you, I had this dialectical discussion with a former Buddhist monk who lives in Santa Barbara. He's a pretty famous author. And we were talking about the Buddhist theory of reincarnation, which is that if you were bad in this lifetime, because of your karma, you will wind up in a worse life. So you might wind up as an animal. Well, this is not what the research shows. According to these people, under hypnosis, they say, humans only come back as humans. Animals only come back as animals. They can greet each other and see each other and hang out with each other back there, but basically it's just one soul to one person at a time. But he said to me, this monk, are you saying that I would come back born in Africa, an HIV-positive baby who is poor? He said, you think I would make that choice? And I said, which one of those words is negative? Because when you examine a choice like that, there may be a lesson there for the people that are helping to save that life, to be compassionate. And what people say under this research is that people that are in the sort of outer reaches of our humanity, Down syndrome people, for example, this is what they say. I'm not saying it. This is what they say, that usually they're higher or older souls that make this choice because they know they can handle it. And they know that the experience they go through is going to be ennobling. It's going to give grace. It's going to give compassion to other people on the planet to help them work through something. It's a gift they're giving to other people. I know that sounds very startling, and it also sounds kind of crazy, But that's what the research shows. And once, I'll tell you, the most dramatic thing I saw was the first person that I filmed. It was a woman who remembered a life of dying in the Holocaust. And as I sat there filming this woman, my brain is swimming thinking, is she making this up for my benefit? I mean, there was a room full of people, about 100 people there to watch a demonstration of life between life therapy. So her past life, she remembered being in the Holocaust. Very graphic details of, being shaved and sent into a gas chamber and exactly what happened and how it happened. She also said her name. She also said her family name, which I then was able to find through an intensive research into records. But at some point, after she went through the experience of seeing her soul rise up out of her body, and then she's escorted back to her soul group, and everyone is hugging her and telling her and applauding her for going through such a difficult experience and, for choosing a life that was so difficult. That was the key question, the key sentence. And at some point, she's in front of what everyone has is a spirit council. People call them the council of elders. They call them the wise, the wisdom makers. They're usually anywhere from 6 to 12 people per person. I mean, everyone has their own. And they're a group of like a council that helps you evaluate your life. They don't judge you in any way, but they help you examine the things that you did that were wonderful and difficult. Okay, you with me? So she's in front of her council, and she's asking the question, why did I live such a difficult life? Why would I choose? She didn't understand. Why did I choose such a difficult life? She paused, and she said, they're showing me images. I know this is going to be difficult, but they're showing me images that it was harder to play the role of a perpetrator than a victim in this lifetime. My head shot up from the camera. That was the most politically incorrect thing I've ever heard in my life. But as she then tried to describe how people had signed up to play different roles, how it was harder for a person to do things that were actually soul-killing and because when you get to this point in your passing on, you have a past life review, and you go over all the things you did in your life. And if you were a victimizer, you get to experience all the feelings and emotions your victims went through. So imagine how difficult that would be to go through for somebody who was a perpetrator. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, but it must be very difficult for the victim, for example, who may go through during their present reality something so harsh.
So horrendous.
So horrendous.
So
horrendous, and then be told, well, you chose this because, and we knew you would have the strength to carry this through as to be a lesson or a model for somebody else.
Well, I'll give you one example. This is another person that and part of my premise was, well, if this is true, this research is true, then I can take anybody off the street and do this. And I did. I found a television producer very skeptical about any of this research, somebody I knew, and I asked if we could do it over at his house, and we did. I went over there and I filmed this. And and again, very skeptical, but the only admonition was that he just tried to not edit what he was saying. So he did that. And in the course of his session, he remembered the life of an 11-year-old girl who very descriptive about where she grew up and everything else, and she wound up in Dachau. And he went to the last day of this girl's life. I mean, he's just very descriptive, her name and everything else, and then her being shot. And then when he went to this council review, he was saying, this was so relentlessly dark. And so the question was, why did you choose that life? And through a lot of sort of working it through, he said, in a nutshell, I had so many lifetimes that were filled with light and filled with joy. I found that I wanted to experience the darkness in a lifetime. Then he said, but it scorched my soul. It so hurt me that I haven't been able to recover even in this lifetime. So the hypnotherapist said, is there anything we can do to help heal you. And he said, they're taking me now to the river of souls. And then he described a river that he then walked into where he could feel the cooling energy clearing this wound that he had been carrying since that experience. So the hypnotherapist was able to help him heal that wound. So I'm saying it's not to say that you can't have a wound in life that's not terrible, that won't carry through and pass on. It's not to say that, it's certainly very brave for someone to choose a difficult life. So I think part of this is to honor that. Part of this, what I'm learning, is to find that sacred. So when you see the homeless person who's chosen an incredibly difficult life, it's not so much that you have to give your life over to them, but just in your mind's eye, see that their sacred choice was so difficult. And at least acknowledge somewhere in your spirit, like, wow, that was a tough choice for them to make. If there's any way I can help alleviate their pain, through a gesture, through a dollar. This is true of everybody that's suffering on the planet. If they made this difficult choice, then it behooves us to at least stop and try to help in any way we can.
So what would you suggest then for people who are skeptical or people who, whatever, they don't really believe it? How would you bring them relief? Should they require relief? What
I usually do with my very skeptical friends, if they haven't left the room already, I start with talking to them about tangible things that they can actually relate to, that speak to not a higher power, but some kind of inner voice that might have something that they can put their finger on. And that is, when you meet your spouse or you meet someone in your life that you feel like you've known them forever, try to go to that exact moment when you met and when you see the other person and what was communicated to you. It's a very simple question. A husband to say to a wife, when did you know that I was going to be your, mate? You'd be shocked at the answer. I'll give you an example. Just the other day, I was with a couple of friends from Utah, both Mormons. We were talking loosely about this stuff, and I asked the husband, I said, so how did you, when did you, he said, oh, well, she's going to say it took us years to get together. But truthfully, for me, I walked into this classroom, and she was standing there, and I just knew she was the one. I said, well, describe it to me. He said, well, the odd thing was she was turned away from me. I was looking at her back. But something about her shape seemed so familiar to me that I had to meet her. Okay, so then I turned to his wife. I said, what about you? She said, well, actually, it was that day. I turned and looked at him. He spoke to me, and there was something in his eyes and something in the sound of his voice that seemed, she said, I can't put it into words. And then she said, it was like I was home. And I said, well, it doesn't get any better than that. That's everybody knows that feeling. So I find this time and time and time again, whenever I talk to people about this, when you really examine, how did I meet this significant other in my life? So I'm just saying this is a way for people to examine it. Okay. But for the skeptics who aren't interested there's no value to it in them. The people who are attracted to this research, I think, are people who are suffering from something that's happened to them, and they can't get their mind around this terrible thing that's happened. Loss of a child, it could be loss of a marriage, loss of a job, something that they thought was always going to be there for them. And so they're trying to get their mind around it. Like, is there any other possibility that there might be something else involved? And by the virtue of that seeking, they find this research. And I don't, like I say, I don't do hypnotherapy. I've just filmed it. But I have had an unusual life of sort of ESP events throughout my life that I sort of show in the book. But at some point in my life, I would just shun them aside. Like, whatever. I saw a ghost, big deal. But at some point, I started to see, oh, wait a minute, this is all connected. This whole journey I'm on is all part of my choice of a chess game. And if I may, in my life between life session, I got to a point, I really didn't think I'd get there, but there I was, standing in front of my counsel. And the question that I asked was, so why did I choose Richard? And the answer was, which I remember pretty clearly, every thought, action, word, or deed contains energy. Every time you think about somebody, every time you speak of somebody, that energy from your inner self moves through the universe and affects other people. Every time you send an email, some part of your energy reaches out and into that person on some subatomic level I don't understand. But it's also true with art. You paint a painting, you write a song. Every time someone hears that song, they hear your intent. They hear your voice. They hear the musical melody of your intent, and it goes through their body and affects them in some way. And I said, in an outside-of-the-box way, I had chosen this life as a filmmaker because I knew I've done mostly comedy. Through comedy, you can instantly change someone's health. They can go from being depressed to a belly laugh, and their whole outlook on life changes. There's healing properties to music and voice and film, et cetera, et cetera. Then I paused and said, I'm just not very good at it. And I got this huge laugh from my counsel and from the hypnotherapist who was in the middle of the session. So it was the only time in my life I've gotten laughs on both planes simultaneously. But I also said, I have a feeling that's about to change. So, that's really, for me, why did I choose me? I think it's also speaks to you and what you're doing. It speaks to authors when they're writing a book. You're putting yourself into this material. And I'll tell you one other visual that goes with this. While I was working on SALT, I was working these late hours, and my family was mostly in Santa Monica, and I was thinking to myself, what am I doing here? This is crazy. It's just, 7 days a week, work. And I had this kind of weird vision of Angelina Jolie's orphanage in Cambodia. Suddenly I saw kids eating at a table, my mind's eye. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. So I'm working so that she can make enough money to support her. Okay, well, that's interesting. Doesn't make me feel any better. But then the next night, I had another quick visual image, but it was a kid in an alley in Bombay selling an illegal copy of SALT to somebody in the alley. And he was taking the rupees from that sale and turning to his wife, who was living in a box with his family. And in that moment, I saw that this metaphor that I was seeing was the wheelwork of how creativity works. You can't see the person in Bombay who's going to be affected by your overtime that's changed his life, that saved his wife. And that's why it was an illegal copy, because no money is coming back, to Sony. It's just the wheelwork of how the energy that you put out there onto the planet, like, butterfly with wings will affect the rains. Well, it turns out that is happening every single day with every thought, every emotion, every word you speak.
So if a young child or an adult sometimes comes to you and says, I hear voices, or I have these conversations, there's nobody around for miles, people think I'm talking by myself, but I'm really talking to somebody else, you're going to say?
First, I would say, check your ears for the headphones. Did you leave the headphones in? That's the first thing I would say. No, but as I would say, because my feeling about this world is you all check the nature of the reality. So if you're hearing voices, it could be one of many things. Schizophrenia, as we know, the brain firing electrical signals across the pattern of the brain. It may touch on a certain chemical area of the brain that causes you to hear a voice. That's possible. So it could be your health might be why you're hearing voices. It could be your DNA structure why you're hearing voices. But it's also possible, and I only say that because it's based on the research I've been doing, that, and here's what they say. I've heard this many times, I said it in my own session, that your past life memories aren't retained in your body. They're actually, this has been said, I've filmed it many times, They travel with you, and this is the way it was described, as geometric shapes. One person described them as fractals. They're like mathematical equations, but in a geometric shape that travels with you. You can't see them, but they're energetic, almost like, and I call them in my session, ball bearings that help you go through your life. Within these little geometric engrams of energy, I'm quoting now from these sessions, retain your past life memories, mostly emotions. They can help you with your life. But if in times of trouble you need access to them, it may very well be that that's what you're hearing. Okay, that's one other possibility. And then, of course, there's the other possibility, which is because, as we know, energy doesn't die. It goes somewhere else. So if somebody's died, that's one of your loved ones, and is out there and they need to speak to you, they only have so many tools in their kit to do so. Usually it's through a dream. This is what they describe. They find a way to sort of enter your dream and give you a message. Sometimes they'll give you a message through a friend who can hear you, who can hear them. The friend says your mother needs to tell you blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it might show up just as a phrase or a word or something else. Imagine it. Well, I'll tell you, one session, this guy said he was speaking to his mother, who had passed away, and the mother described it this way. She said, "Son, when you think of me, it's like picking up a cell phone. Cell phones, we don't know how they work. They have, these radio waves that float around. We're not really sure what it is, but when you flip the thing open, you push a button, you hold it to your ear, you hear your loved one. Your loved one is talking to you. So if you wanted to speak to someone who passed away, this is what she's saying, you just pick up the cell phone and call them. They can hear you. Might be difficult for them to respond to you, but they will get back to you in some way. It might come through a friend. It might come through some other possibility. Of course, you've heard that saying, when people go into every Sunday, they go to some big hall and they pray to people that aren't there. That's normal. But when the people respond, then they're nutty.
Yeah, well, my grandmother used to light a candle on the anniversary of her husband's death. And it was the kind of candle that you really had to do a lot of manipulation just for it to blow out type thing.
Right.
And she would always leave a cup of wine, a wine glass filled with wine, and a wafer. And the stuff would always be gone the next morning. And she would, She didn't swear, but she pretty much stoutly affirmed that no, she did not drink it. No, she did not eat it. And she certainly wouldn't blow out the candle because the candle's supposed to be on for 7 days. So, and your conscience mind or your skeptical side of your mind say, well,
right.
It probably evaporated.
Somebody heard, a friend came in there, a mouse.
A mouse, exactly. But she would give you this very disdainful look and say, you're wrong. He was here. Right. I felt him. He caressed me. We talked. He told me I was doing good, and then he would go.
That's great.
And,
that's great.
You don't wish to say to your grandmother, you must be crazy. Right. Consequences of that act are at your own risk.
Just the other day, a dear friend of mine, we started talking about this. I fully expected him to be in the skeptical camp. And he said, Rich, I totally was skeptical about everything you're saying, but last week my mom called me. Her husband had died 20 years ago, and she was in her condo in Florida, and she said he walked into the bedroom wearing his pajamas, looked at her, walked around to his side of the bed, got into bed, looked at her and said, I just wanted you to see that I'm okay. So imagine how difficult that was for him to manifest himself in pajamas that she would recognize. But he did it. Now, you could say, somehow it's a manipulation of your brain that they're using the energy to do so. You're seeing these things. That's possible. I don't know. I'm curious about it, and that's why I'm interested in doing this. That's why I wrote the book. I want to know the mechanics of it. I want real scientists. And by the way, Gary Schwartz, the PhD from Harvard. He was the head of a Yale Medical School. He and I got on written a number of books about this subject, about ESP. And I started talking to him through email, and then we spoke on the phone because I was trying to say, you should check this stuff out. And he said, can I write the forward to your book? I said, why? He said, I'm fascinated by what you're saying. So he did. So I am not a scientist, but I know scientists, and I know a scientist who was so impressed with what I had come up with that he asked me to write the forward to the book. And he's a Harvard PhD. You can't take that away from him. He's a Yale PhD, and he's at the University of Arizona now. He's given his life to science, but I feel like, because I'm an amateur, when I'm hearing about fractals and engrams and geometric shapes, I don't understand it. I can repeat it, but if we have a quantum physicist there under hypnosis, Stephen Hawking, talking about, of course, he doesn't believe in this at all, but talking about this stuff, I mean, there's somebody to examine. Talk about choosing a difficult life.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure you're aware that Hawking was married to one of his nurses, and she abused him. And they had to get divorced because he married an abusive wife. I mean, from this research, this is a guy who chose this particular life because he knew it would get him spiritually where he wanted to get. And all I can say is the only way to find out the truth about that is to wait for somebody to come back and tell you, you're right. You were absolutely right.
But don't you can also consider it that when they do this is something that they have to do? I mean, I felt my mom used to tell me her dad used to come to her every night and say, Betchen, that was his nickname for her, Betchen, when are you going to come and join me? I'm lonely here. And the one time he did not show up was the day that she died.
Oh, how sweet. How sweet. Well, it was from the first part of what you said, what I found in the research is that there's no concept of evil or negativity that exists back there. This is what Newton's research shows. So there's no sin per se. There's nothing where you have a life of difficulty because you sinned in a previous life. It just doesn't exist in the research. And the second part is him letting her know that he's there. When my wife's mother was dying, she said, the next time, you're going to be my mother. Now, my wife at the time, she didn't know anything about this research, and she was like, what? Why would she say that? It must be, she's dying. People say a number of things as they're journeying, but here's what I find fascinating. There's books about people's last words, famous last words.
Right.
Napoleon was there, like, reporting for duty. But one day I thought, isn't that funny? Maybe those are the first words you're saying in your next life.
Yes.
You're reporting for duty. Here we go. We're on to the next journey. And this is the thing that's repeated over and over and over again, that people, when they're under deep hypnosis and they get to the moment of death from a previous life and they're asked, where would you like to go now? They always say some version of, and I said it myself, I want to go home. Home is there.
Yes, I've said it. Yes, I understand.
It's the playground.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes I get very upset and people say, why are you crying? And I say, I want to go home. And they say, well, you are home. And I said, no, this is not my home.
Well, let me add to that, which is because, people that are having a difficult time on the planet, they want to check out early because they want to go home, okay? But here's the other interesting thing I haven't mentioned, which is when people are under hypnosis, they're asked, how much of your energy is here? That's a question that Newton-trained people ask. And people answer it. They'll say, usually, about 20 to 40%. Of course, I always find these questions hilarious because why don't people just say, how can I know that? But they always answer. In my case, I said 38%, whatever that meant. But here's what it means. The majority of Lillian's energy is always back there between lives. The majority of your energy is there. Only a percentage of Lillian is here on this planet doing the things that Lillian needs to learn and experience and do. So my question was, well, what the heck is the rest of me doing back there while I'm here?
Don't
and
ask.
Then, what they say is there's all kinds of, things. You're going to classes. These classes come up over and over again where you're learning more things, very deep concepts and profound. And some of the classes are how to help people on Earth, how to be a healer, how to be a doctor, how to channel the light, the healing light of the universe into a patient. These are great lessons about humanity. But they also say this: Earth isn't the only playground. There's other places to go and reincarnate. And those other places are what they describe as kind of like vacation places. As one person said under hypnosis, you can learn more spiritually in one day through going through a tragedy than you can through 5,000 years being on some other planet where nothing happens.
Yes.
So the Earth is, according to these people, again, I want to throw that in there. This isn't me. This is what the research people are saying. But basically, Earth's the playground. Think of it as going on stage. When you're backstage, you pick up the props, you put on the helmet, you pick up the sword, you put on the jacket, you wear the boots, you walk on stage. You say your lines, but maybe you're improvising a little bit, and things sort of happen kind of the way you agreed to do it. Think of it as 3x5 cards. Oh, at this point, I'm going to meet you. We're going to get married. You can always change. You have free will. You can always go, I'm putting down the sword. I am not doing this anymore. You can do that. And then eventually when you take off your costume and go back stage, you're greeted by your fans, which are your loved ones who've been doing this with you forever, and they applaud you for your fantastic performance. But what a wonderful concept.
Isn't that the same thing that they say that humans do not use the full capacity of their brain power?
Well, they do say that, but, I also think, maybe we just aren't measuring it properly. It's possible that we are using other parts because it's an electrical system.
Yes.
It's that thing of like, I remember when I was in college, somebody said, that they had a craving all the time for a particular fruit. And it drove them nuts. And then they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, you're missing potassium. That's why you want to have blueberries and bananas. There's this thing of animals that are in Africa that when they're bit by a cobra, there's a particular kind of rodent that knows that the antidote for the venom is to rub up against a certain type of tree. Now, they aren't being told that by their parents, but something is passing that information on from generation to generation. So it may be that, it's Gary Schwartz once said to me, maybe that our brain is a little bit of an FM receiver, receiving consciousness, receiving stuff that's outside of our body, but we're not aware, obviously, of how it works and what the process is. Thank God, because how boring would it be if we all knew what the process was. And I want to say one little thing, because it came up last night when I was talking about the book. Somebody mentioned about suicide, and it's a thing that, of course, people, it's a really a deep and profound subject of people wanting to check off the planet at a certain age, and they think, what the heck? If there's no sin, I can just check out. Well, what people report is when you get back there, all of your loved ones are looking at you like, how could you break the deal, break the contract the way you've done it? There was so much work to get you to where you were, and you screwed it up with drugs. You screwed it up with these things. And, of course, you feel terrible because you know that you screwed up everybody else's journey of your soul group. Everybody's life has been affected by it, and the people that you left behind are tragically affected by it. So it's still a given that there's not sin involved, but there still is this concept of people want to come back and do it again right away. And imagine how much work that is. So everybody's here for a reason. Just hang on. That thing that they've been doing, it gets better. They've been doing for, sort of gay teens. They've been bullied.
Yeah.
It gets better. Well, this is true about life. This is true about the journey. As difficult as the stone is in your path right now, I'm telling you, the stone in your path, you may have put it there yourself. You may have agreed to let that person be mean or abusive to you so you could learn how to forgive them, to let that energy go. And it's so powerful to forgive and so powerful to give people compassion and love, and that that it changes your life completely. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's important that, this isn't something where some kind of philosophy that I'm espousing here. It's not at all. I'm just based it on the research. And I think it's important to note that it's a sacred journey we're on, and you really got to give it its due.
Well, not only that, when you go through a horrible incident, whatever, and there's a large amount of horrible incidents that can happen to a person on this journey of life, one of the things a person must remember at all times is that however horrendous it is, there's only two outcomes. It's either going to get worse or you're going to deal with it and get over it.
Right.
And, I mean, that has sustained me in some of the horrendous things that have happened to me in my life, and while I wasn't really happy about having them happening to me, I also know, and I know my son would groan if he ever heard it, it has made me more aware. It's made me inwardly a better person, even though what happened to me was so horrendous, you really don't think it can happen to you, which is a favorite expression on this planet now. It can't happen to me. But the problem is it does happen to you, and it happens to you because there's something that you are lacking that needs to be addressed. And as horrible as that sounds,
it might not even lacking kind of denotes a negativity. I'm just saying it's the right word, of course, but there is another version of it that you want to explore so that you can become more whole as a spiritual person.
Exactly.
So that there's an unusual story about a sniper who served in Iraq. They called him the Marlboro Man, and I was reading an article about him some years ago, and this one sentence jumped out at me. He said while he was sniping, killing people in Iraq and Afghanistan, he said the lives of his victims would flash before him as he pulled the trigger. And that disturbed him to such a degree that when he came back to the States, he found himself sort of living in a trailer, and the guy who had taken the picture of him smoking a Marlboro that had made him, when he'd gone around the world, the LA Times photographer, he'd sought this guy out and tried to help him with therapy and stuff like that. But that sentence jumped out at me, that he was experiencing on some energetic level the life of somebody that he was taking, almost as if he had agreed in advance to be this person who was going to do these things to help these people and to help himself experience it. As weird and difficult as that sounds. But hopefully, in his next journey, he won't have to do that anymore. Absolutely.
So, Richard, please tell everybody where they can find your book, how they can find you on the Internet.
Oh, very good.
And how to contact you.
The book is Flipside, A Tourist Guide on How to Navigate the Afterlife. It's in Kindle right now and at Amazon.com. And my website is flipsidethebook.com, and also you can find me at richmartini.com. Pretty easy to remember. And, if you're interested in any other nonsense I've been involved with, I'm on Wikipedia, and I'm also on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, just my kind of really unusual career through Hollywood. But, it's an honor.
The flip side of the tourist guide through Hollywood?
That's right. Well, I have finished the documentary. It's 90 minutes long. I am still trying to figure out where that's going to be. I may just offer it, just like the book, out there and in the ether. I found that people that need to hear this stuff or need to examine this, they find it, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And honestly, I had someone come up to me at a party once and say, "You're the guy who directed You Can't Hurry Love." I said, "Yes," and she said, "It changed my life. I saw that movie 6 times." Now, I looked around the room. I thought, she's kidding. She's got to be kidding. Nobody saw my film. I mean, it came out in the 1980s, but, not that many people saw it. She said, "I really understood the message. You don't have to be somebody else in order to be liked. It changed my life." And I said, "I'm so glad that I was able to make a movie for one person
Absolutely,
to
who is
understand
paying
it
attention.
and get
Come
it.
on.
That's right. So I feel the same way about this book. I spent a couple of years of my life, swimming in this world. I may continue and write more, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm still filming more sessions because they just come to me. And if one person, it helps them on some way in their journey, then I've done my job.
So what do you plan in the future? Do you plan to do another type of book, or are you planning to keep on trucking with this and
Well,
get it
I'll
out
tell you,
to the masses?
there's a Facebook page for Michael Newton's people that have done past life regression and life between life stuff, and somebody invited me on it, and these people they've read the book and they sort of are talking about it on this Facebook page, and everybody I comment on something that somebody said. So somebody recently said, you just take your comments and publish those. They're so fascinating. They can't wait to see volume 2. So, if I can, I will. I will write a volume 2 and 3 and 4. And, it's the tip of the iceberg. What I'm talking about is the tip of the iceberg. It's a fascinating topic. There's another book called, I just want to mention it, My Life After Life by Galen Stoller. This is a young boy who passed away at the age of 16. But somehow, through his father, who's a pretty famous pediatrician, he's been able to set up a communication so direct that his father downloaded a book written by Galen where he talks about the afterlife from his point of view, going to classes, doing all these things that when I read it, I said, well, this is the same thing and this, by the way, the pediatrician never heard of Michael Newton. So it is interesting that the more research that's out there where people can actually access this stuff and learn about the afterlife and learn about where we're going and also learn about why we're here. It really couldn't hurt the planet to figure out what we're doing here. Oh, and by the way, if reincarnation is true, then doesn't it make sense to have a planet to return to where you can have fresh water and clean food and clean?